Communion. I once celebrated communion with a parishioner during a visit. We two together. I did it exactly as I would do it here, but sitting down and quietly. I reminded us that where 2 or 3 are gathered, there is Jesus. And she looked at me and she said, my goodness, I feel all tingly. I feel it. And I said, Jesus is here. And she said, yes. I've never felt that tingling before. And I said, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? When you really feel the presence of God. And she nodded. In that moment, it all meant something. It was everything and nothing at the same time. It was nothing because it did nothing to diminish my frantic to-do list, but it was everything because we were sharing the presence of God in that moment. A presence that contains the energy for the infinite possibility of transforming our own perception of what is important. In that moment, as we shared the bread and cup, we sat at Jesus' feet, just as Mary did. Mary certainly must have felt that same tingling, I think, as she sat at Jesus' feet listening. In that moment, I'm certain, to Mary, it all meant something. It was everything and it was nothing. It was nothing because it certainly didn't lessen the expectations concerning her frantic to-do list of hospitality. But sitting at Jesus' feet was everything because her listening brought about a communion between teacher and listener that buzzed with the presence of God. Poor Martha was still wrapped up in the frantic to-do list for the evening, which turned out to be a lot of fuss over nothing that was really important. The bustle, the distraction, the worry over her guests, a million things to tend to, the inevitable things that go wrong, and the very real need for help. Help from her sister, who was just sitting there, for pity's sake. I think if we're honest, we mostly side with Martha on this one. Especially those of us, those in our community who've been doing the bulk of the dishes after fellowship time. After all, Mary should be helping her. But Jesus is an interesting guest. There were many stories in which he reminds hosts of their bad hospitality. Many stories in which Jesus reminds hosts of their bad hospitality. And we want to side with Martha, and we expect Jesus to side with her too. And true to form, Jesus says something completely unexpected, telling Martha to stop being so anxious about everything, and that Mary has actually picked the better way. We tend to give the idea of being a Mary or a Martha some kind of rigid boundary. You know, that those of you who have been doing church for a long time probably remember Mary-Martha groups. And that question, are you a Mary or are you a Martha? And who was right, Mary or Martha? Do you sit and contemplate or do you work? 2 choices. I think the story is between the words. The story that we're supposed to recognize, because that it's in each moment we are thinking about and noting how God is showing up in that moment and choosing that space. Jesus uplifts the stillness of Mary in the face of a system that demands constant busyness as a marker of worth. I think Jesus is inviting Martha to stop doing and just sit there. We live in a system where production equals worth. So busyness has become an idol idle, O-L. And we say that idle, L-E, hands are the devil's playthings. Jesus reminds us that sometimes our hands need to be idle to notice what God is saying to us. Mary sat quietly listening. She allowed herself a stillness that led to attentiveness to the divine spark that we each yearn to find in ourselves. We can't connect to the presence of God through production or anxiety that busyness upholds. Self-worth is not proven by how busy and stressed and stretched we are. I mean, think about it. When we're going and talking to our friends, how many of us go, oh man, what a week it's been. I just sat and contemplated and it was great. And I didn't do anything. And I got so many wonderful ideas that I can implement for my life. And I got so much sleep and rest. And it's more like the banner of who is more sleep deprived, who is busier, who has more that they can't just get to, who's running faster on a treadmill of where. We do that. Self-worth is not proven by how busy and stretched we are. The better part sometimes rests in the pause and the inspiration that comes from allowing ourselves to stop doing and just sit there. A somewhat literal translation of what Jesus says to Martha is, you are being anxious, and you are being anxious about many things. Jesus' rebuke has less to do, I think, with her attention to the work of hospitality, which, yes, is very important, and more to do with her distracting anxiety about it. Here, anxiety is what is keeping her from recognizing the buzz of energy that can be felt by slowing down and sitting down at the feet of the divine. Mary noticed the buzz and sat down and attended to that. She was attentive to that tingle that alerts you to the presence of the meaning that is everything. As in my own experience with communion, it changed nothing about Mary's own to-do list, but perhaps it did shift her perspective about how to approach life in a way that was transformative. So the parting words of our passage last week had Jesus saying, go and do, as in go and show mercy. Go and do the same. And today Jesus is saying, sit and be. This is a strange thing to embrace, because as we have noted, we privilege go and do over sit and be, but the two are linked. Again, our instincts tell us that Mary should help her sister. But our delving into this story should not be limited to a debate about which sister's activity or lack of it is best and blessed. I think it's a two-binary, dualistic way to look at it. There must be something of the third way to learn here. Perhaps the third way lesson takes shape as we release the idol, O-L, of productivity and see that an outward seeming idleness, L-E, within that space, the best work will be accomplished. I was doing a little research into the concept of Sabbath once, and I read a number of articles about CEOs of giant companies who actually put on their calendar, sit and stare at the ceiling. Because it forces them to go into that space where they can still their minds, maybe rest a little bit from the franticness of the work. And it's in those moments that the most creative ideas come. And when one allows oneself that, when one goes back to work, one is more productive. And I remember years ago on that NPR show Marketplace, about 20 years ago, there was a study about napping. Many adults in this room will find this a relief. Adults need naps. They did another study that they found that when adults would sleep between 10 and 2, not after 3, it interrupts your night sleep, between 10 and 2, most adults go into a dark room, lie down, no distractions, will sleep between 10 and 50 minutes, and wake up, be better at decision making, be better at whatever work they're doing, be more creative, be more productive than going and getting a Coke and a Snickers bar and powering through it. We have permission to stop doing and sit there. So I have come to the realization, hard one, that I'm a natural Mary and that's okay. This is part of my creative nature. Because I know, true creativity needs space and stillness to manifest. Honoring this has taken years of self-examination, self-actualization, and spiritual skill sets for rejecting the guilt of not doing. I learned very clearly, very young, that production equals worth, and there's always more to do, and this can be true. But we get caught up in the anxiety of how much, so that we A, create an idol, O-L, of it, or B, just burn out and don't stop doing while we're burned out. I think that a lot of us have burnout right now. Raise your hand. Anyone burned out? I think the world is burning us out, much less our personal lives. Burned out still from this pandemic and the here today, this today, and we are burned out with the constant ambush of news that the world is falling apart. So my word of hope about the world that feels like and maybe is falling apart is this little piece of wisdom that I think is anonymous. It's in the form of a little story where you go, I went to God and I said, God, help me. And God says, here I am. I'm falling apart. And God says, yep, you are. And I said, put me back together. And God says, no, you've outgrown that self. But I will be here to help you reconstruct and rebirth yourself and who you need to be. And maybe that can be a love song to the world that feels as if it's falling apart. The world is falling apart and it scares me. Yep. We have to glue it back together. No. Because that world has been outgrown and must transform. And binding together, we can help to transform it to what it needs to be. And to put it all back together, we need map makers to lead us to those clearings where new construction can happen, and we need architects to help us plan those new structures. Because if we're there are some of us who know what those structures look like. I think they're sitting next to Chris. And there's some of us, and they're sitting over here next to Lori, and they're in the nursery right now. And there's some of us who know that it needs to happen, but they're not sure what it looks like. And there's some of us who are like, I can't imagine any of it, but I'm with you. We need all of that. We need all of the wisdom of those who are saying, I don't know what it looks like, but I'm with you. We need that wisdom. We need the wisdom of the new vision. We need all of that in map makers and architects to help us plan the new structure that aligns with the values that we profess. That is where the natural Marys come in, the ones who sit quietly attending to the buzz of the divine presence and allowing it to speak through them in that quiet way. The natural Marys can teach us to listen to the deep teachings about how to reconstruct what is falling apart in our hurting world so that we can go and do. And then the going and doing part means like, hey Marthas, could you join us here? We need the Marthas too. The natural Marthas. You know, John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, established small intentional spirituality groups called covenant groups. These groups met regularly and covenanted with one another to check in, support, challenge, encourage each other in their spiritual journeys. I feel like I'm standing in a big covenant group this morning. The idea was to help to lead people to their own spirit space, to that tingly space where the presence of God enters and everything has meaning. This would then allow people to let that space inform whatever was happening in their daily lives and to go and live it. And the first thing that happened in this group was that they went around a circle and each person answered the question, how is it with your soul? So I ask you this morning, take a moment and reflect on that. How is it with your soul? Jesus wants us to pause and sit at the feet of that question. How is it with your soul? Jesus disturbs the litmus test of worth that we might use to prove that our souls are fine. We might mistake the question, how is your soul, to mean, how are you? And we often mistake the question of, how are you, with, what have you been doing? And we would likely start talking about how busy we are, how we have so much on our plates, and how we really don't even have time for this pause. And about how we really don't even have time for this pause, and we're committed to meeting, so here we are. There are too many things to attend to in the kitchens of our lives. And we really need to get back to them because there isn't any help. And the members of our covenant group would say to us, you are anxious. And you are anxious about many things. Why don't you just sit at the feet of the presence of divine love for right now? A friend of mine posted an image on Facebook years ago, and I often use it as my cover photo. And it's a wooden board that is surrounded by calm things like flowers and candles and rocks. And engraved in the wood, it says, "Be still." So we're going to do something that's super comfortable. We're going to do a little breathing together. So I'm going to ask you all to just take a deep breath. And I'm going to say, be still a few times. And each time I say, be still, we're going to take a breath. Be still. Don't just do something. Sit there. Be still. Sit there and connect with the divine love. Be still. Release the need to fix, solve, give in to anxiety about the to-do list. Be still. Be bathed in the calming presence of meaning found in that stillness. Be still. Here is the deep well from which our tired spirits can drink and be nourished. Be still. Here is the call to our spirits of vision and wisdom. Be still. Listen and know that the presence of the one who shows us how to love and how to live is here.
Be still. Don't just do something.